This PowerPoint presentation on the interpretation of the Gospels, as well as all PowerPoint presentations by Dr. McLean, are copyrighted and should not be used or copied without my permission. A harmonization of the Gospels is not the gospel. We must study each of the Gospels individually and not collectively. The Gospels were written about Jesus and not by Jesus. The Gospels contain similar or same historical stories, miracles, discourses, etc. But this information can be used differently, uniquely by each writer. No Gospel tells the whole story of the life of Jesus Christ. All the principles of hermeneutics must be applied to the Gospels. Authorship, recipients, historical and cultural background, argument, purpose, etc., must be applied in conjunction with the special principles of gospel genre. It is important to recognize that there are 4 canonical Gospels that are distinct and independent of each other. There are 6 major considerations in the formation of the 4 Gospels: the writer or writers, the audience, the purpose or purposes, the selectivity of material, the adaptation of the material to the audience, and then the arrangement of the material by the author. John 20:30 says, "Therefore many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these things have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." Of course, the signs and the miracles in John are very important, and we'll talk about that more. John 21:25. "And there are also many other signs which Jesus did." This shows the selectivity, which, if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written. So we will expand upon these 6 major considerations in the formation of the Gospels. We must remember the general principles for interpreting the Gospels. They are 4 Gospels not to be blended together. We need to think both in terms of the historical setting of Jesus, what was Jesus saying to his audience, and then that of the authors of the Gospels. How were they selecting, adapting, and arranging the material for their message, for their argument? The literary context is structured by the historical setting of the life of Jesus and the literary setting into which the authors place the accounts in his composition. Such elements as audience, occasion, setting, introductory or concluding remarks, commonality, and gospel genre can help the exegetic understand the authorial intent. It's not only important to understand who the author is, but who the audience is. The audience relates to the people addressed in the fancy word pericope, or the literary unit or the story. To whom was Jesus or the speaker talking to? The disciples, the multitudes, the Pharisees, the scribes, etc. Matthew 3:7 says, "But when John saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming for baptism, he said to them, 'You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come?'" Now, in this situation, we need to understand that Matthew is quoting John, and John is focused on the Pharisees and the Sadducees, so we need to know who they are, and we need to understand what Matthew's audience understood about them and how they would have related to the Pharisees and Sadducees as they listened to Matthew give the account of John. The occasion refers to the events that form the episode of the event. Was a question asked? Is a statement being challenged? Was an accusation made against Jesus or someone else? Was a miracle performed and then there's a reaction? Was there a reaction from the people to some previous event? An example is in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying," Matthew wants us to understand, he wanted his original audience to understand that Jesus had been born, so he's not a child in the sense of a baby. He's a small toddler. He was born in Bethlehem, fulfillment of prophecy. And what was going on in the days of Herod? What kind of a king was Herod? And the occasion of these magi, these wise men, arriving from the east. All of those are things that we need to explore. The setting involves the location of the historical event and how that location in time and space may enlighten the story. Is this part of the Sermon on the Mount? Or was it something that took place in the temple? Was it a private or public declaration? Was it at the beginning or ending of Jesus's ministry? In Matthew chapter 4, Matthew sets the stage when he says, "Now when Jesus heard that John had been taken into custody, he withdrew into Galilee." He went to Galilee because there was great hostility in Jerusalem. And leaving Nazareth, he came and settled in Capernaum, which is by the sea in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. This was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Here we have location of historical events that must be understood within the context of the narrative of the story in order to fully appreciate what is taking place and what the author is seeking to communicate. Introductory comments refer to a statement by Jesus, the speaker, or the gospel author that provides some explanation for the understanding of the pericope or the story. An example is in Luke 9:51. Luke says, "When the days were approaching for his ascension, he was determined to go to Jerusalem." This is a very strategic change of direction of Jesus's ministry in the Gospel of Luke. And so from there on, we need to follow the determination of Jesus as he moves towards Jerusalem, where he will have the triumphal entry, which was actually a tragedy, then all the conflicts, death, burial, resurrection, and then ascension, which of course Luke begins with the book of Acts. Concluding remarks refers to a statement by Jesus, the speaker, or the gospel writer that provides some explanation for the understanding of the pericope. Now in John chapter 3, we have Jesus meeting with Nicodemus at night. And one of the things that we need to be aware of is, when does the interview or the interchange or discussion with Jesus and Nicodemus end, and then John begins his commentary on it. Here we find in John 3:14 through 16, which is probably John's commentary on the interview or the discussion that Jesus and Nicodemus had, when he says, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, so that whoever believes will in him have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten or unique and special Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. So these are probably concluding remarks by John about the significance of Jesus talking to Nicodemus about being born again, or it could also be translated born from above. Commonality refers to a repeated theme or themes that link several pericopes or stories together. An example would be the 7 signs of the Gospel of John. The first one being the water turned into wine at the Canaan wedding feast. Another one would be the 3 lost items, which are unique to the Gospel of John. You have the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. The fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies in the Gospel of Matthew is a repeated theme and shows commonality. Matthew, writing to a Jewish audience, is going to quote Old Testament passages more than Mark, who writes to Gentiles, or Luke, who writes to a Gentile. Let me illustrate this for you in tapping into Luke chapter 15, the 3 parables of lost things: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. Now, these 3 stories, these 3 parables in the Gospels, are all introduced with this statement. Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to him to listen. That is, in a sense, the introduction. Then there's further comments. Both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." Here we have what spurs on the need of the parable and the gospel. This is what gives and prompts Jesus to teach these. Now in Luke 15:3 it goes on. So he told them this parable, saying, "What man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open pasture and go after the one which is lost until he finds it?" Jesus, within the parable, Luke, within the gospel, is raising the issue, raising the questions that we need to understand and know about, so that we understand that Jesus is answering these questions, making the people think about these historical illustrations so that he can make the major point. An example of commonality is the fact that every one of these, something's lost and something's found. Angels rejoice in heaven. These 3 parables have several themes of commonality, and when each one is told, it just heightens and heightens the message more and more. Now, as Luke goes through and has these miracles and has these parables and different discourses, in Luke chapter 16:14, we now have a conclusion, and it's a conclusion with a commentary. And this is probably from the gospel writer, Luke, when he says in Luke 16:4, "Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him." You see, there's the conclusion. There is the final statement, probably not by Jesus, but that is what Luke interjects. And so the beginning, the audience of the tax collectors and sinners, and the ending helps us to understand how to apply the parables. There are 2 assignments to this PowerPoint. Assignment number 1, John tells us that part of his gospel included signs, divine miracles, to convince the readers to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. I want you to read through John and identify the signs or the miracles and explain how these inform the reader of the messianic mission, that's the fact that he's the Christ, and the deity of Jesus Christ. That's the Son of God. The first sign is the wine at the Canaan wedding feast. The second assignment is in Mark chapter 3. And the setting for the miracles that follow after this are accusations that have been charged against Jesus. Jesus is called crazy, out of his mind, by his family, and demon-possessed by the religious rulers. Mark follows this confrontation, this introduction of this confrontation in the audience, with a response by Jesus beginning in Mark 3:23 through 25. How does Jesus provide a rebuttal to the outrageous statements of his family and religious leaders when they say he's crazy, he's demon-possessed? Write a one-page summary of how Jesus defended himself. Then look at how do the 4 miracles that Jesus did provide a rebuttal to the accusation that he was crazy and demon-possessed. In these 4 miracles, does Jesus demonstrate any craziness, or does something opposite of that happen? Does he demonstrate any demon possession, or does something quite opposite of that happen? Read through those, think of these things, and you'll enjoy a wonderful Bible study. This PowerPoint presentation on the interpretation of the Gospels, as well as all PowerPoint presentations by Dr. McLean, are copyrighted and should not be used or copied without my permission.